name is Vyshika Willis. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and you are watching Chatters That Matter. Let's talk about it. All things health and wellness. Make sure you tune in.
Hey, 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 it's Dr. Cheryl BryantBruce, MD, the celebrity doc, and I am here today with Chatters That Matter. Let's talk about it. And I have another wonderful guest with us. This is Ms. Vyshika Willis. Now, Vyshika, welcome to Chatters That Matters.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely wonderful having you. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping, as usual, reminding you that I am a bona fide MD. Anything that you hear is for informational purposes only. This show is here to educate, inform, and entertain you. I am not your medical doctor. If you hear anything that you find interesting or that you think might apply to you, we encourage you to reach out to your primary care physician and seek counsel. So with that behind us, Vyshika, if you could please give us your background.
Yeah, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Oregon, and I'm originally from Las Vegas. So went to school in Oregon, stayed there, living in Portland, and I have a private practice called Black on the Couch, and my area of focus is on serving the Black community and really destigmatizing mental health and getting the Black community to use mental health as a resource.
Excellent. Now, Black on the Couch, we're here in Black History Month, and as Vyshika said, we really want to talk about destigmatizing the use of mental health providers. Now, you know that a lot of our focus over the past year has been on mental health and mental wellness. And there is a real reason for that. I mean, generally, across the board, worldwide, we have had just a crisis of mental illness, or even if not mental illnesses, mental challenges. You know, we went through COVID, and that created a lot of stress, and a lot of people found themselves struggling. What were some of the things that you saw during that period?
Wow, that is such a big question. Of course, PTSD, because we also had a racial uprising during that time, right? So there's that aspect, but also a lot of anxiety, of course, you know, around like, you know, death, loss and death and grief, all of those things, depression. And I think on the relational side, because that's my area of expertise, people are at home with their loved ones more. And so people aren't getting a break, including the kids and the teenagers, right? And the couples, the adults are not getting a break. And so a lot of like relational distress.
Yeah, I mean, there was that thing where all of a sudden everybody was closed in together, and you really did find out how functional relationships were, because while we were busy being busy in life, you know, there were the kids' activities, and there were, you know, sports and games and parties and things that everybody was doing. Everybody's off to work. So we really were only touching each other tangentially. You know, what do they say? Ships passing in the night. And even with relationships that may have been strong when the marriage started, you know, 1 or 2 years into the marriage, they start popping out kids, and everyone's focus becomes on the kids, and the relationship between the two adults isn't necessarily there. So fast forward, especially to people who had older children, you have this situation that rises up where all of a sudden everybody's in the house together, and mom and dad are looking at each other and having to relate to each other.
And talk to each other.
Communicate with each other.
And talk to the children.
That's right.
Right. And then also there's another aspect of like COVID babies. So there's like there's a generation or a set of children who are just now touching people for the first time and getting outside too. So that's another kind of phenomenon within this conversation as well. But yes, absolutely. Being able to relate to each other and finding out things that maybe they didn't notice or wasn't that big of a deal to them. And they're noticing like, well, maybe this actually does matter to me, and having to talk about it and not knowing how to do that.
Right.
And so during COVID, there was definitely an increase of people seeking services, which is great. And then maintaining that for those who did touch base with a therapist, counselor, coach, and now they're in like the maintenance phase and trying to figure out, well, now how do we continue this now that things are open?
Now that we're back into the world.
Yes. And so not losing that aspect of the relationship either, because they've spent a lot of time together and noticing that maybe we weren't really doing that before, and we want to continue that too. So it's not all bad, you know. There are some good and great outcomes from that too.
And I mean, from a relationship standpoint, I saw one of two things happening, and both could be construed as good because it defined the relationships. You saw relationships that either realized that they weren't a fit and they blew apart, and there were other relationships that strengthened in that. And, you know, why would I say that them blowing apart would be a good thing?
Yeah, really, I mean, there's multiple ways to view that, but initially what comes to mind for me is finding yourself and realizing I need to do something more for myself. I need to focus more on the things that fulfill my needs and my wants, and noticing maybe some patterns, which is also part of my training, is noticing the patterns that people get stuck into and realizing that this is part of an old pattern that I want to break. And so it's great to find out and take that step and have that courage to just step out and do something different. That's so hard.
Yes, it is.
But it's so fantastic to make that step and that change.
And I, you know, in speaking to other women, I did hear that, because a lot of the women would start to say, well, you know, maybe my partner really isn't for me. And this has been time for me to evaluate what I want, because before I didn't know what I wanted. And one of the things that I realized is there is a pattern, you know, in whom I do have a type. You know, whether I said I didn't have a type or not, when I look at these people who may have appeared very different initially, I see that there is a thread, and I've been picking these people that may not have been the best for me. And this COVID period allowed me to define not just who I was, but what I wanted. What's making me happy, what doesn't make me happy. I think that doesn't make me happy is probably even more important than the what makes me happy.
Because what happens is our brains naturally go to the bad, the negative. And so we have to really be intentional. This is everybody, not just, I mean, me too. You have to be intentional about catching that when it happens, but your awareness has to elevate in order to do that. And so that is something that therapy provides, is increasing your level of awareness. And not just when there's a crisis like COVID happening, you know, or, you know, a loss or anything like that. But even just if you're in transition, maybe you're like, you know, one of the things that COVID did is that people realized, I don't really like my job. I don't like that. And so a lot of people that I worked with and continue to work with, that we worked on figuring that out. So it doesn't have to necessarily be this major thing that happens. It could just be, in a transition, don't get me wrong, transition is a big deal, but it doesn't have to be a crisis that we typically see in television and movies and all of that. It can just be, you know, everyday life stressors that get to you. So I think, I mean, of course, all of these things that we've been talking about were definitely themes in the pandemic.
Now, people in general can be resistant to seeking mental health, but the African American community in particular, and this is Black History Week, so Black History Month, so you are going to see that the shows this month are largely focused on the Black community. within the Black community, there is a real resistance to mental health.
Yes.
I'm not crazy.
Right.
I'm not going, I don't want anybody in my head.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. First, we have to kind of go back a little bit and really talk about the medical system. And mental health is connected to the medical system. And we know that the medical system has used Black people, brown people, poor people as people to be used for experimentation. And so that is something that is carried with us, which is a traumatic event. And trauma, we know, is passed down through the generations, and it's in our gene. So even if we don't know
genetically encoded mistrust.
Yes, we don't know why we don't want to do it. Sometimes it can be connected to that. Even if you've never experienced it before, you just get this feeling. There is a book that just recently came out by Dr. Jennifer Mullen, I believe, and it's entitled Decolonizing Therapy.
Right.
And it is a read. So just take heed to that. But she talks about that and how much the history of trauma on Black and brown people really impact the way we show up in the world. Right. And that is not something that we can disconnect from the process of healing. And healing is ongoing, where nobody is fully healed. We are all healing, okay? So the whole point of therapy is not perfection. It is about progress and, like I said earlier, increasing your awareness. And so when you're going into therapy, understand that the person is not going to tell your business to anybody. And if they do, you can report them. And that is something.
And it's a big deal.
Yes,
it's not, really big deal.
It is not. It's equivalent to attorney-client privilege, right? So they're not going to tell your business. They really are there to help you. They really do care about what is going on, but also you have agency too. If you're not comfortable, you can always go to someone else. And ask questions, right? Because this is your journey. You have a place you're trying to get to. So go ahead and ask those questions when you make the call, and also reach out to people. Maybe you're not ready to talk to like a professional. Reach out to people around you. People who show up for you, people can hold space. And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't even know what hold space means. That just means when you have something going on, they are not talking about also what they have going on. They're really listening to you, validating what you're going through, and empathy, right? I'm sorry that happened to you. That really sucks, that kind of a thing. So,
or holding you to accountability, not allowing you to excuse yourself out of your own bad behavior.
Yes. Now I will say, my therapeutic style is that. And I mean, all therapists,
really important.
Yeah, like I don't play a therapist, right? I am myself, and I am a therapist. So, my way of like speaking, like we're talking now, like this is how I talk in therapy. So, finding someone you're comfortable with too is important, so that you can start to build that relationship. And we understand that we're strangers to our clients, just like our clients are strangers to us. And it takes time to build that relationship, and that's okay. We don't expect you to like put everything out on the table on day one. That's not possible. But just start, you're just like you're meeting a new friend for the first time. Yeah.
I think that it is important, though, to define, again, your therapist is a practitioner, and, they will become your friend, but they are not your friend. They are your therapist.
Yes.
And lines have to be drawn. Yes. And if your therapist is drawing those lines, it's not anything against you. There are lines of propriety that they can't cross. And I mean, especially if you've got a male-female therapy relationship, I don't care how cute your therapist may be. He may be fine as all get out, sexy and all that. And his job is to be supportive of you. And just because he's being supportive of you, or he's smiling at you, or you feel like he's friendly, or if, he touches your need and support or something, baby girl, that does not mean that he is in love with you. Don't go off of that deep end and think you're going to marry your therapist. There are legalities there that draw some hard lines in the sand regarding that, because you are vulnerable when you come to a therapist. And there's something called Stockholm syndrome, where, if it's a captor, or if it's, someone who is in a role that is perceived as superior to us, we can really bond to that person, and it may not be the healthiest bond. So if your therapist is doing some pushback and defining that line for you, it isn't because they're a bad therapist, it's because they're a good therapist.
And let me also add to that, everybody in that process of therapy is human, right? So those feelings that you have, or, you feel like your therapist is your homegirl that you grew up with, and they just really get you. Take that as a teaching tool as you go in the world and you start building relationships, because what's really happening is that you're finding out, oh, this is how it feels to be treated with respect.
Right.
This is how it feels to be seen.
Yes.
This is what it was like to be validated and heard. And that feels amazing.
It does.
It feels amazing. So take that information and kind of use that along life's way as you build relationships with other people, to kind of help you identify like who your people are.
Yes, absolutely. And if you see in your therapist things that are drawing you, that you're attracted to, sort that out. Figure out what it is in the therapist that you are being drawn to, because those are things that you can also look for in your friend, because your therapist is creating this positive space for you. And that's what you want out in the world too, to find the people who can hold positive places for you. So you definitely want to look for that.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about coping skills. Yeah. Because one of the things that COVID showed us was that a lot of us had very, very weak coping skills. And, even if we had some coping skills, they tended to, dry up and blow away during COVID. And, everybody just kind of lost their minds. So let's talk about what some of the coping skills people may have used during COVID. And let's talk about what are healthy coping skills.
There was a lot of baking of bread, buying plants, and pets. Now, I was working more during COVID. So if I wasn't in a situation where I was participating in all of those things, but, the cooking, finding new hobbies, like, plant parents out there and pet parents out there is wonderful. One of the great things about, some pets is that it forces you to get outside because you have to walk them or something like that. That's so important, to get out of your environment and not stay isolated. It also gives you an opportunity to incorporate some physical activity. So exercise is another great coping tool, but it's also not just for your physical self, for your mental health, because it releases chemicals in your brain that help with decreasing anxiety, decreasing depression. And there are some studies that say it's like equal to medications, and there are other studies that say it works better. You have to work that out with your therapist, psychiatrist, general practitioner. But the facts are that it does help. Some of the things that probably got a little bit out of hand are like the shopping.
Oh yeah, because everyone was online, buying stuff that they probably didn't need. Did you see coming out of that, or even during that, did you see a lot of shopaholic?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's that excitement of getting that package, like Christmas morning, right? You're getting a gift, however often you're ordering things.
Yes.
But that can have a significant financial impact, which can cause a lot of mental distress, unease as well, and also some possible conflict in your relationship too, because you're overspending.
Right.
So, it starts to cause a lot of issues. So
particularly if you're not the primary breadwinner.
Yes, yes. And also during that time too, right? People weren't working. So a lot of people weren't receiving an income in the same way.
Right.
So, that does carry over. It could carry over into, for some people, it did. Overeating too, to kind of self-soothe and deal with, the stress of everybody being at home and that becoming a habit in how you deal with difficult things. Whereas before, maybe you were able to deal with it better. So, those are a couple of things that.
I don't know the answer to this. Did you, as a practitioner, see a rise in alcoholism and drug use? I mean, I would imagine so. I mean, I couldn't say because I wasn't actively practicing. Seeing, I had a handful of patients that I maintained because I was actually going through a battle with leukemia at the time.
Okay.
So my focus was inward.
Sure.
But my perception would be that alcohol abuse, drug abuse, basically all of the abusive behaviors, including physical abuse and emotional abuse, would have been significantly elevated during that period.
Anything that was making people feel good or an escape from all of the things that we were seeing on television. And we could also add television
addiction.
Yes. And binge watching.
And internet addiction.
Yes.
I mean, we became social media addicts.
Yeah. All of those things. And, pre-COVID and even now, those things are used by a lot of people to help them with coping with difficult things.
Right.
And I had a conversation with someone the other day and they were saying, we're out now and people don't want to do a lot of talking.
Right.
And they're going to the alcohol, they're going to smoking and all of these other things still. And so, that definitely, I mean, and I can only speak, I can't give y'all any like hard numbers, but for the folks that I was seeing, yes, I would say, I did see an uptick in that.
And then, I mean, you said something significant there, in that as people are coming out, they're not wanting to talk as much. My perception was that people actually did lose their social skills. Even the parents and stuff that had been out there lost social skills during that period. And then God bless the poor little children who were just beginning to try to gain social skills. They didn't get that opportunity, so they are at a disadvantage as they're proceeding through trying to negotiate the rest of life. And little children, they learn through play and through patterning. And now these kids have examples, parents who are communicating dysfunctionally.
Right. Yeah. I love that you brought the way that children learn.
Yes.
And I talk to parents all the time and, we discuss how they learn things and they then discovered like, oh, I swung the pendulum the other way because I didn't want to be like my parents.
Right.
And now
absolutely.
I'm dealing with trying to get back to center with my own children.
Right.
And I know we're talking a lot about, COVID and the pandemic and all of that stuff and those things that impacted the community during that time, but it is still impacting the community today. And I think even more so because life is just different. We've all simultaneously experienced the same traumatic event.
And do you think that there is a significant pathos or grief associated with that? Because people kept saying, I can't wait to get back to normal, but it's a new normal. We can never return to that old normal. And so my sense is that people are grieving the loss of what was. Absolutely. And there's insecurity and uncertainty in what's coming because the world is just so chaotic right now.
Yeah, there's a term for that. It's called disenfranchised grief. And basically, it's literally everything we just got done talking about. But it doesn't look like traditional grief, right? There's a lot of avoidance. There's a lot of just covering, masking, and not wanting to deal with whatever you were dealing with during that time.
Right.
And so you haven't really processed all of that. And none of us really have processed the entirety of what was going on. Like we were wiping down things before we took them into the house. You know, we all witnessed empty shelves and what that felt like to kind of feel like, am I going to be able to get what I need?
And we all lost our minds and went and bought toilet paper.
Yeah. Not so that we really, the file was full.
I was like, why the toilet paper? See, I can't eat toilet paper when the shelves go bare, you know, but if I have to, as long as the water's running, I can wash. And then there's always a leaf outside I can wipe with. Why did the toilet paper run? It was the strangest thing.
Yeah. And also on social media, witnessing, you know, the loss of our members of our community to police violence. And
that was such a weird time.
And unfortunately, those things are still happening, but it's not, you know, it's not. Well, it's still televised, but we're not sitting in front of the TV 24/7 for 3 years. Right. We've escaped that to do something else that's fun, that feels good. We don't want to feel that way anymore. We don't want to experience that anymore. But the reality is that it's still in us. And until we acknowledge and until we deal with it and recognize it and learn how to live with or cope with all of the things that we're experiencing emotionally, that comes out in our behavior, in the way we talk and the way we relate to people, we're going to continue the same patterns that maybe we were taught from our parents or that we witnessed at home or that we witnessed in our community. And so it's very important to kind of interrupt that and do something else that's healthier, more beneficial to you.
And I think that this is a good time for all of us to address anger issues because there was so much going on and there was a lot of anger in the African American community. And I mean, justifiable anger. And we came out of the box and everything started smoothing over. But as things started smoothing over, even though we're not seeing it as much because, you know, it's not just being driven into our heads because we're sitting 24 hours a day, you know, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 3 years. We're not sitting there like that. So we're not seeing it as aggressively, and yet we're still seeing it. I mean, there was the celebration of the guy with the chair. I mean, the entire African American community was like the chair guy. He became a hero. And even for someone like myself, who I tend to be very nonviolent, there was a sense of satisfaction there. You know? So I think that we really do need to address that generational anger that really got triggered during that period of time.
What I will say is oftentimes we associate like emotions into category of good and bad. All emotions are good. We all experience the same emotions. Like no matter what gender, no matter what sex you are, we all experience the same emotions. They're not different. The way society tells us what is okay for some to express and others not to express is a different conversation. There's nothing wrong with being angry. Like, you know, you were just saying, rightfully so.
Yes.
And everybody's work is different in this process when we're talking about social justice. And I'll say too that my work intersects with social justice work as well. So when you're doing that work, there's a lane for everybody. And also everybody can't do everything, right? So figure out what your post is and get on your post and do that and kind of focus on that. When it comes to dealing with your emotions, however, sometimes people aren't necessarily angry, even though that's what they say. It's just the easiest thing to kind of pinpoint. And so oftentimes I work with people and give them something, you all can Google this, the feelings wheel or emotions wheel. And it has there are like millions of them online. But really identifying what it is that you're feeling, which means that you need to download the Merriam-Webster's app on your phone and start looking up the definition so that you can really start to associate, like, is this what I feel, or is it something else that is kind of adjacent to that, but it's not really that. And so I think that's another area of growth for the community, is like really developing our language around what we're feeling so that we can better address it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there is an area that I have a lot of concern about that has become very, very toxic within the community in general, but definitely within the African American community, there has become this toxic relationship between men and women. I mean, really, man bashing, women bashing. The two can't agree on the fact that it's day or night. And I mean, it may be very clearly daytime and a woman says it's daytime and the men say, they're just like a woman, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And it has created such an ugly gap.
Yeah.
What happened
What
there?
Is going on?
And what do we do about it? Because it's ugly.
So there's social media and then there's the real world. So the couples that I work with, that is not what people are talking about. Even with my colleagues, when we get together to discuss maybe like cases we're struggling with, not divulging who the people are, but just the content that is being spoken about so that we can show up better in our work for our client, right? That is not what is happening, right? I think that if you spend a lot of time on social media, that conversation is some of it only resides there. The unfortunate thing, individually, people who are not partnered, not in like exclusive relationships or anything like that, I find with some of my clients that they do partake in that, and we have to have discussions about that and deconstructing that, where these ideas come from for them. And so for individuals, I would say really taking a look just personally on an individual level and investigating a little bit more why these ideas resonate with you. Because a lot of the times it comes from a past hurt that hasn't been resolved or recognized or validated, and you haven't really processed through it. This is what I find. And this is on all sides of the gender spectrum. Okay. So that's what we spend a lot of our time doing in session, myself and clients, is really deconstructing and investigating a little bit more, why this resonates with them so much. My job and therapist job isn't to get you to think what I think. It's to really for you to investigate why you're doing what you're doing, why you're thinking the way that you're thinking, so that you can make a decision. Instead of, well, my mom said this or my dad said this, so I just do what they do. Because as kids, that's what we do. We're just,
Right.
doing whatever our parents say to do. Yeah.
And then you hit a point as kids where you hit that adolescent period, and there's the pushback. That pushback is healthy.
It is. Yes. And what is happening in the brain is literally, you know this already, but the brain is literally falling apart.
Right.
There are pieces of the brain that are not being used. Those pieces are kind of like, okay, shedding off, and the ones that they are using are kind of strengthening. That's the most simplest form to kind of explain that. And at the same time, in development, most parents want their kids to be out on their own, being able to survive and do things on their own. And in order to do that, they have to pull away.
Right.
And that is the time that happens.
Right. And that allows us as parents to let them go too, because if they remain those cute little cuddly children that, brought us all of those hugs and affection, it would be very difficult for us to let them go. But when they turn into these obnoxious teenagers that are pushing back, it's like, I can't wait until you get out of the door and I can have myself back.
Yeah, so there's that part, but then there's this, they just won't do, I have to repeat over and over. And I say, yes, you do have to repeat over and over because they are still a child. And so I know that, there are generations, and even still now, of people who were made to be adults too soon.
Early.
And that has been normalized for us.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's deconstruct that a little bit. For these people who have been made to become adults too soon, what gets lost in transition? I mean, we'll take a severe example of it in Michael Jackson. He didn't have his childhood,
right,
and he never developed normally.
And so, I mean, that is kind of what happens for most kiddos that age or who go through that process, is that they get stuck there and then they try to be older than they are, but they're not mature. And I always say to people that, who are older and love to say that they're grown, that's great. That means you're older, but are you mature?
Right.
And that's something that's totally different. And with children, it's the opposite, right? They're not grown, but they're expected to be mature. And so I'm not saying that they can't be mature for their age, but sometimes they're treated as though they are older because they're more mature for their age. And some of that is,
or that maturity is forced on them.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say, is that sometimes it's forced on them, and then that could lead to compromising situations or dangerous situations, like having to be responsible for certain things that they really shouldn't. And I get it, because when we're looking at the environment and the family system and structure, the adults have to work, and sometimes the kids have to work too, and everybody's pulling their money because, everybody's struggling financially right now. And so I understand that. What I am saying is, if you are a person who grew up, like my mother grew up taking care of her siblings,
right?
She shouldn't have had to do that, but she did. And just because you did it, it doesn't mean that should be the thing that's carried through the family. Sometimes within the community, I hear all the time, I got this and I turned out fine. And it's like, yeah, but you really shouldn't have had. And actually, that's not okay, even though you experienced that, and we need to talk about that.
Right.
And so passing that along, do you really want to pass that along to your children? And then have them pass it along to your grandchildren? Is that what you want to be the thing? Or do you want them to just be able to be 16, age appropriately, give them responsibility, not enable, which is different.
Right.
And learn how to be a healthy teenager versus a teenager expecting them to run a whole house.
Yeah. Now, situationally, sometimes things occur, and I was one of those who I was in a situation with a very sick child, and when the going got tough, the tough got going. And so my daughter, who was the oldest, at a very young age, started to help out with the care of the little one that was very severely disabled. And, she was my right hand person. And, sometimes she had to sacrifice, she might want to do X, Y, or Z. And no, we can't do X, Y, or Z. Or no, I'm going to need you to watch your brothers. For me, it wasn't a choice. We had no other option in order to make it work.
Right.
But one of the things that I did try to do, and my mother used to say, well, you're talking to those kids like they're adults. And I'm like, no, I am communicating with them on a level that they can understand, because a lot of times we undermine what children understand.
Yes.
I'm communicating with them on a level that they can understand, to make them understand the why of what we're doing, the why they have to participate in it. You have got to take on, some of this responsibility, and this responsibility is helping you to grow and develop, and, help me show you how to do this. And anywhere that I can, I'm going to give you that space to lose your mind and just be a child. But when I need you to step up, I need you to step up, and it's all that we can do, or we're going to fail as a family.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up too, because that definitely could have gotten lost in translation from what I was just saying.
Yes.
So when we're talking about age appropriate responsibility, some of that is that, right? But also not forgetting that, your teenager is still a teenager.
Right, absolutely.
And so that's something to highlight.
Absolutely.
And then also the piece that you talked about, communicating with them at their level.
Right.
And a lot of times as adults, we don't want to stop and take that time. But these children and teenagers, adolescents, they are still people, and they don't know.
And they need help.
Yes.
They want guidance.
Yes. They don't know. And sometimes we expect them to know what we know already. And we forget, like, that at that age, there's a lot we did not actually know, even though we felt that we did.
Do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so teaching them not, if they're 16, 17, not as though they are 6 or 7, but teaching them as though they are their age.
Right.
And explaining
and expecting
the why.
Expecting them to behave their age and to accept responsibility of their age.
Yes. I often tell parents, something happens, sitting with their teenager, and talking about what happened, but also talking about the consequence, and asking them what they think should be the consequence. And of course, ultimately, you're the parent, so you get to decide that. But what that does is it allows your child and your teenager to feel heard.
Yes.
And also they understand that, I don't necessarily have the ultimate say so, but, this is just because, you get upset with someone doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them. And as parents, of course, parents get upset with their children, right?
But it's important if parents get upset with their children, not to, particularly when we come to discipline, not to discipline the child out of a place of upsetness with the child, but out of a place of, is this discipline appropriate for the level of transgression of the child? Right.
So now we're talking about discipline versus punishment.
Exactly.
And those are very different. Discipline is teaching, punishment is more, it can be considered more harmful because there's no communication behind it. And really there's no real learning on the other end. So
and that breeds resentment.
Yes. And what we want to do is we want to discipline. We want to discipline children, teaching them why this isn't okay, what is okay, what the expectations are, and what the consequences are.
And one of the things that I found interesting, because you talked about offering the child, the choice. Well, what do you think is the appropriate discipline for this? And people, the first reaction is, well, of course, the child's going to go soft on themselves.
You'd be
But
surprised.
the opposite was what I found when I would offer my children the option of picking their discipline. I'd be looking at them going, well, I kind of think that's a little bit harsh for that particular child. They usually would be a lot harsher on themselves than I would for particular things, which may be reflective of their own thought process, that they're in their own head and they know why they did what they did. And I don't, all I see is what's there. So they're not just punishing the activity, but the thought process behind it. They're like, okay, I was way wrong and I need to correct that out. Mom didn't see that part. So I'm gonna check myself on that.
Right. When I talk to my teenagers, sometimes not sometimes, I will say 100% of them say that they don't feel heard. They don't feel listened to. And so creating that space for dialogue will help. You were talking about the pulling, we were talking about the pulling away. It actually helps to foster better communication. And when something is really serious, they're more likely to come to you and, let you know that there's something going on, even if it has nothing to do with them. It could be a friend or something like that. They know that this is a safe place. Yes, mom, dad, aunt, or whoever, caretaker, means business, but I know that they care about me and they'll listen to me when I come to them with a problem.
And that's important for them to have the sense that you care about them. Because I know one of the things that used to happen when my kids were teenagers was I had a house full of teenagers and dogs, and everyone would land at my house for dinner, and groceries are expensive, and I'm like, don't these kids have homes to go to? Why are they always here? And why, if there's a problem, are you always drilling them here? Why don't they go to their parents? And the kids would say to my because my kids were complaining, oh, she's so strict and she's this and she's that. And the kids were saying to them, you're lucky, because they wanted to be like kids whose parents were permissive. And kids are saying, no, you're lucky. Your mother cares enough to know where you are, what you're doing. Your mother cares enough to stop and listen, and so that you can have this relationship with her where she is a friend, but the lines, she's still your parent. And these kids are like, we're just kind of out here flapping in the wind, and that's why we come to your house, because your mother's going to give us some guidance. The kids want guidance,
and structure too, right? So we said earlier about parents really are just modeling for their children. And so I oftentimes find myself telling parents, this is a mirror. This is, you're probably getting even more upset because the things that you've done, it's coming back, you're seeing it, you're seeing where, and you're trying to hurry and stop it instead of having a conversation and just, communicating from your experience instead of don't do this, don't do that, why. We're back to the why I'm saying this, what I experienced, and I love you and I don't want that to happen for you.
Yeah. And I think that why is important, and answering those why questions. I mean, because they start very, very early.
They do.
3 years old, they can, why? But why? But why? And just because I said so is not a good answer. It's not.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
I think it's really important to give them that why at a level that they can understand it and make it make sense to them. And that way they can internalize the why. So then they can use that why to structure other behaviors.
And they're not going to get it right all the time. Adults don't get it right all the time.
No.
And the other side of that coin is I tell the teenagers that, we may be older, but we don't know everything.
Yeah, we're not perfect.
So another great thing about therapy, I mean, I can only speak for myself, and then, the other therapists that I know and work with, we oftentimes tell our teenage clients, I don't know, I'll tell you next time. I'll find out and I'll tell you next time. I don't know. And they will ask, well, you said you were going to do this. Did you do it? Right. Yes. So keeping your word. And so the therapeutic process, not just for adults, but for the children and the teenagers, also show them, you know, what a healthy adult relationship is like. And also keeping us accountable as adults. And then, you know, when I work with kids and teenagers, I also work with their caregivers, you know, and I explain that to them, that just like we want people to show up for us when they say they will, they expect that too, probably even more so, because they solely depend on the adults in their lives, and they don't really have voice to advocate for themselves in the same way.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now we are in the middle of it's media week right now, and we are going into the Super Bowl.
Yes.
So we have all of these athletes around. A lot of them are Black athletes. A lot of them are very young men.
Yes.
And they have the additional stressors. And yes, it is a stressor when you get a lot of money fast. It's sure, you know, it's nice to have that money, but it is a stressor. There are young men who have the, you know, the stress of having all of this money. They have the stress of having all eyes on them, becoming suddenly role models. And a lot of them melt down pretty quickly.
Yeah.
What do you say to the community about how to support these young men, and also how to support our young people who are looking up to them, so that the young people understand that they didn't just arrive at this fame. You know, he didn't just arrive as an NFL, you know, superstar. There was a whole process of work that came to it. How do we address that to the young people, and how do we address the coping and everything that goes with it for these young ball players that are, you know, now here in their starlight moment,
right? Know? Yeah. I think I'll start with the athletes. For the folks, the community around the athletes, the support that you give to them has to come from a place of zero expectation for them to do anything for you. In the same way that before they got all of the money and the fame and the celebrity, because that is a tremendous amount of stress.
Yes.
To take care of an entire community. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do that. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. On the athlete side, the person in that position, really taking onus of what you can do and what you cannot do. We're talking about boundaries now. And understanding it's okay to say no. And it's okay to have other professionals in place, whether that be a financial advisor or an accountant, CPA, whatever, or a therapist, right? To help you with establishing those boundaries. And a lot of times hiring the professionals and getting together with those professionals make it a lot easier for you, because then, you know, that is something you can say, well, I have this structure in place, and that's just what it is, right? Now, you're still the responsible party, right? And I'm not saying just put the blame on the, you know, professional that you hire, but I am saying that using that as a tool and a resource for you to establish those parameters around whatever it is, whether it's your time, your finances, or, you know, even just whether or not you have the capacity to show up for the things that people expect you to show up for.
Right.
And understanding that you have a different level of responsibility this is still a job, right? So it comes with a list of rules that you said, yes, I will follow, or yes, I will show up here at this time, and, you know, taking that responsibility. For the folks coming up and looking at them as a role model, I think it's great to do that. And at the same time, you know, a lot of the athletes, when they went to school in order to get to where they are now.
Right.
And that's part of the journey and the process. And so we can't, there's even in the therapy journey, there, you can't skip steps, can't just get to the end, to the end, right? And change happens slow. I know we're used to instant quick fix, you know, fast food, all of that, but it takes time to prepare for something that is significant, that is filled. And now I'm thinking about food because we're in Vegas and they have so many good restaurants out here.
And it is dinner time.
Yeah. But, you know, if you go to, you know, a restaurant, you're going to sit there, you're going to wait because they're preparing the food, and that takes time. Same thing for this process, for anything that you want to do. It takes time, and there's a process, and you cannot skip any steps in order to get there. And if you do, you're going to miss out on a vital piece of information. So if it's, whether it's the workout or attending the class that you really don't like, those are the things that you have to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been a great interview. And, you know, I can think of so many different things that I would like to ask you. So I certainly want to bring you back. And there are lots of discussions that we can have around the African-American community and helping it to thrive.
Yes. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. You have been listening to Chatters That Matter. Let's talk about it. And if you can give us a way to contact you. We will also put all of your information below the when this goes out onto the internet, and it'll be everywhere. So we'll put all of your information below. And again, as always, if you don't see the information and you want to contact her, you can always reach out to Hurricane and I. But give us your contact.
Yes, I can be found on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Black on the Couch, and email is blackonthecouch@gmail.com.
Okay, so for those of you who are anywhere near your computer or near your phone, go ahead and jump on there at Black on the Couch and tag her. Tell her what you heard that was meaningful, and you know, if she'd like to ask questions, I'm sure she'd love to have discussions with you. And you know, one of the things that I encourage is for those of you who are out there listening and you have events coming up and you need a speaker, want to talk about some of the topics that she's addressed, she's here. So, you know, definitely utilize her. And for those of you who are not in therapy, I really want to normalize therapy because there isn't a soul on the planet that cannot benefit from therapy, ourselves included. So, you know, I think that one of the great things that has happened with the COVID and everything else is we saw a lot of very public meltdowns of very high profile people. And I think that helped towards the normalization of talking about mental health. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm not feeling as well as I want to, and I need a little bit of help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. So, therapist, we're here for you. Chatters That Matter. Let's talk about it here every week. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.